everyone! Welcome once again to the vast and ominous Comic Vault. I am Captain Logan.
And I'm Dan.
And Dan and I are with you once again to review the somewhat recent Death of Wolverine. This was the 4-part story by Charles Soule that did, you know, just what the title says, killed off Wolverine. This was a long time coming. This was a big thing that Marvel was touting up really, really hard that I naturally could not get excited about because it's kind of another... You know, been there, done that thing. Okay, we're going to kill off a character because he's kind of oversaturated. We're going to leave him dead for a while. We're going to do a legacy thing and make a big, giant deal out of it so that we can try to sell some more comics off of the fact that he died. When Superman did that, it was new, and the fact that Superman was dead and seeing a world without Superman was what was interesting about it. I don't know that the same thing is true of a character like Wolverine, Dan. What do you think?
I feel like in the position that Wolverine was left in at the point where they killed him off, it could be potentially interesting. Wolverine's a character, we discussed this a little bit off camera before we started recording, where Wolverine's a character that I like a lot, but not necessarily in some of the positions they put him in lately. But I feel like under the pen of Jason Aaron, especially when Wolverine and the X-Men was going on, I feel like the character was developed to a point where I could buy him being a teacher of the X-Men. Like Wolverine's struggle with that, between being a cold-blooded killer and being a teacher of students was interesting. That dichotomy and having him develop to a point where he was a kind of leader in the place of Charles Xavier after Avengers vs. X-Men. I feel like that's not the position I would ideally like to see Wolverine in, but I feel like Jason Aaron got him to a place where I would buy it. The writing was good enough where I was like, okay, if we need to have Wolverine in that position, I can buy it because of how well you set it up getting to that point. But, I don't know. I feel as if Wolverine's a character where there's not all that much more to say with him. I always liked him as kind of the background character that would be kind of cool, and he got like awesome moments every now and again rather than making him the central focus. And this book kills off a character that I'm not all that invested in right now.
Yeah, I felt the exact same way about it, and importantly, Dan and I are probably the least qualified people to review this book. At least of current comic fans that know some stuff about, current comics, but have not been reading anything Wolverine. Because I didn't read anything leading up to this, or very much, and I didn't read anything, I haven't read any of the stuff after it either.
We were reading the X-Men comics, like All New X-Men and Uncanny X-Men, but I wasn't reading any of the solo Wolverine titles. I know Paul Cornell was writing that for a while, and that's where he lost his healing factor and stuff like that.
Right.
So the build-up for this might be lost on me and you, but I was reading Wolverine and the X-Men. I was reading Wolverine stuff where he was with the X-Men from, Schism onward.
Okay,
so I have kind of a sense of where he was at.
And a lot of that Jason Aaron stuff I didn't read. Would you agree with me if I were to say, and maybe I shouldn't put it that way because I don't know if I agree with this, this is just an idea I want to throw out, is Wolverine one of those characters, kind of like Batman, where he's so popular that we give him multiple books, we put him in a lot of different things, and there are different versions of him at the same time? I think he maybe is one of those. I'm not sure that Jason Aaron's Wolverine with Wolverine and the X-Men feels exactly like this character that we get here in Charles Soule's book, and we have places, of course, where we call back to that, and there's a panel where toward the end of the book, and of course, as we always do in the show, we're going to completely spoil this book and analyze it a little bit, talk about the book as a whole. There's some stuff at the end when Cornelius is like, what have you done ever, Wolverine? What have you accomplished? And there's like a whole page of like all the things he's accomplished, and one of them is that he did the school and he taught there. This feels like a sobered up version, but like not to the degree of teaching at a school, of the Wolverine who was in the original Weapon X book. I feel like he's going back to Miller and some of that stuff.
I definitely agree with that. I think this book read to me like Wolverine's greatest hits album.
yeah, absolutely. And I think in some ways it feels like it has to be that in order to kind of bookend his life and make it maybe a little bit poetic, and it's like that thing that George Lucas said in the Star Wars prequels DVDs. It's like poetry, it rhymes, and I think they kind of I think that they're kind of trying to do that here, and I'm not saying that it's completely not effective, but it sure feels like, and getting into the book now, it sure feels like we're looking for excuses to shoehorn in as many really important Wolverine characters as humanly possible right before we kill him, and the book is so aware that he's gonna die. I have a hard time believing that even Wolverine himself doesn't know that he's about to die, and then Wolverine has dialogue where it almost feels like he knows he's about to die. Like in middle of issue 3, we are 30 pages away from Wolverine dying. And he has a line about how one of these days, and I'm like, well, it's going to be in, like, I don't know, for me, about 10 minutes,
I feel like Charles Soule, he's a writer I like a lot, first of all. I'd like to say that. He's a writer that I've read stuff that I love.
Red Lanterns.
Some of the other things he's written.
Yeah.
Yeah, Red Lanterns. I've read some of his She-Hulk. I really like that stuff. This book just feels to me like it's so self-aware of what it is. It's not an organic kind of thing where you start out and the character gets to a place where the story demands that you kill him off, otherwise the ending feels cheap. It feels like the ending was determined and he was writing towards that ending the whole time. And it's just sort of like him playing out, I mentioned before Wolverine's greatest hits, where like all the characters that you want to see involved with Wolverine right before he dies come in and fight him. Like there's 2 fights almost every issue with a character that you want to see fight Wolverine before he dies and get that sort of fanboyish payoff kind of thing. It's not really all that interesting of a story to me because it's just people fighting Wolverine. If it was, an examination of Wolverine's humanity, potentially, like the most interesting things to me in this story was at the end. I think it's in the last issue where the guy that started the Weapon X program, and he's talking about how, the Wolverine is one of the only animals that kills for pleasure other than humans, and how he was talking about the scientific Latin, because that's the language of science, the Latin name for Wolverines and what it means and stuff. I was like, that should have been the crux of the whole miniseries. That's what it should have all been about. And many Wolverine stories play with those similar themes like that, but that just wasn't at the forefront. That's not what the story was focused on necessarily. It was all just kind of big action Wolverine doing the fights that you want to see him fight before he dies. Like he fought Sabretooth, he fought Lady Deathstrike, he kissed Kitty Pryde, which was really strange. And he all of those sort of moments that Wolverine fans might want to see before he dies happen. Well, it was just kind of like fan service to me as a miniseries.
Importantly, the guy who was possessing Kitty Pryde at that moment kissed him, so it's not like he's like suddenly making a move on her.
Right, but it's like fanboy fulfillment now that Kitty's old enough.
That's a great point. Nope, that's a great point, and I just don't know that we ever need to see that. After what you just said, I'm going to go this far. I think had I read that last issue and knew there was stuff before it, but didn't read it and just read the last issue, I think I would have liked it a lot more. Because your mind fills in the blanks, and I would have been like, oh, this is a story about like defining who Wolverine is versus the perceptions of him, right? Where we're like, what is the animal versus the man. You get to the end, and he makes the big sacrifice, and he's proving that he's not just a self-serving character, that he's not just the animal. He's not just about the primal, instinctual, like a self-preservation stuff like an animal would be. And so the man who goes back into Weapon X at the end is very different from the man who left it, or arguably the animal that left it. I think the last issue is actually kind of solid if the lead-up was different. You know what I mean? Because like all of that, especially visually and thematically, is pretty cool. I like the image. I mean, a lot of it is images, right? The stuff that I'm liking. You get to the end, and the image of Wolverine is once again indestructible, but that's what killed him. It's a cool image, I mean, like
it is very cool.
He lost his healing factor. He gets completely soaked in adamantium, and he's like his own statue of himself now. Like I was reminded of Death of Superman, where it's like Superman dies and then you erect a statue of him. And Wolverine was supposed to, or would have been immortal had he never lost his healing factor. He didn't want to be immortal anymore, and we should talk about that and why that is and whether or not we buy it. But he didn't want to be immortal anymore, and now he is, but he's dead because you can't bury it. You can't. You know what I mean? Like he's just there now. And I don't know exactly what they do with him with like his body after this, but he's indestructible again, and he's like this erected testament to his own life. That's cool.
It is very cool, and I feel like all of the stuff in the last issue that's introduced is really potentially interesting. The guy that started the Weapon X program, trying to create weapons that were actually, controllable, and he was able to micromanage them and be the opposite of what he viewed Wolverine as.
Yeah,
is potentially really interesting. If that was the whole story, if he had Wolverine figure out in the first issue, oh, some guy's making, weapons that are similar to me, but he's able to control them, and how he thinks he wants to change the world based on those things that he creates. Because he talks a lot about in the last issue, like, oh, these weapons that I'm making are going to change the world, but he doesn't specifically say why or how or what his plan is.
No idea.
If that was fleshed out more, that could be potentially really interesting.
Yeah.
Because I feel like that's a thematic thing that you could play with, and it would be really interesting and, would be really fitting to end Wolverine's life with. To say you can't necessarily control people, because Wolverine's a character that, he's an animal. He's a character that you would think would want to be controlled, and without being controlled by anybody, he kind of turned that into something good, like free will. Free will is the thing that allowed Wolverine to be a good person eventually.
That's a good point.
That's something that I feel like would be a good thing to play with if you're going to kill that character. But it's all just kind of explored haphazardly in the last issue, and the lead up is just kind of him fighting people.
Yeah. The really interesting stuff to explore is in that last 6-8 pages, and but there's also a thing that's brought up earlier, and I really want to talk about this, which turns into a in the kind of two conflicting arguments, like a counter. Like Cornelius has kind of a counter way of looking at things to Wolverine's about mortality. So Wolverine says, I don't want to be immortal anymore, because if you were immortal, you make mistakes, but you have forever to fix them. And if I know that I'm going to die, then every moment counts, and I feel like my life isn't meaningless. Cornelius is counter to that. Not that they have an argument about it, but he has this opposite worldview. He's about to die. He's 115. And he is, and he knows he doesn't have too long to live. I like, by the way, that there's no mention, or that I remember anyway, of he's got an illness and he's dying or anything. It's just, look at him. He doesn't have much longer to live. He's an old person. I like that. And he's like, before I die, I need to accomplish these particular things. And this idea that the counter to that is mortality and impending death can lead to an ends justify the means mentality. Because if you know that you're about to go out, maybe you don't care about the moral implications of things, because you're not going to be around anymore to feel bad about it or worry about it. It's just a matter of accomplish the big thing you want to accomplish before you die. And maybe, I don't know if that isn't justifies the means the more I'm thinking about it. But it kind of seems to just be I don't really care what the moral implications are. I'm not going to have to be around to deal with it. And then by the end of it, Wolverine takes this kind of third path, which is self-sacrifice. Okay, every moment, this one moment counts. Anyway, I don't know if I'm making any sense, but I don't think I fully figured all that out. But there's a thing there, and I'm trying to suss it out.
I think what it is a person that's mortal, who wants to make an impression on the world, they have to think about their legacy, the impression they want to leave on the world. What do they want to be remembered for? And that's something that Wolverine never had to consider before.
No, that's right.
That's something where he was I have to make an impression on the world, but I can always fix my mistakes, as you mentioned, because I'm immortal, and I never have to really deal with the consequences of my actions in a way, because I had forever to fix them. And he's a guy that did something despite that sort of luxury that he had, and this guy did bad things in the world in the interest of doing something great before he died. And that's sort of an interesting dichotomy between the two, where like immortality wasn't necessarily a negative thing for Wolverine. He didn't have to be apathetic and just see the world as something that he could fix down the line. He invested himself in trying to make the world a better place despite being immortal. And the guy from Weapon X sort of wanted to change the world in a different way, but it was more about him. It wasn't about changing the world in the interest of all the people around him and making the world better for everybody. It was more of like making the world better in the sense that people would remember him for something that he did.
I guess, like, ultimately where it all breaks down is I don't really know what he was after. It was
what his plan is.
Yeah,
exactly.
All Soul really had to do to convince me of all of that, and I mean to just make what he was doing make sense is because he keeps saying stuff about making the world a better place. It seemed to me like what he was more interested in, at least just from what we get here, is he failed at a thing, and he wants to go out having fixed that failure, which is like a twisted version of a road to redemption, where it's not a matter of righting a wrong, it's a matter of like fixing a thing that you didn't do right in the first place. So instead of like righting a wrong, it's more like I was never able to get like the pipes in my sink to work right, and like the water always spouted out everywhere, but like now I'm good at plumbing. It's more like that, right? And so you get to the end, and he's like, I was never able to control somebody like Wolverine. He's obsessed with control. I need to be able to control him. And the thing I couldn't get my mind around was just that. So what about that, right? Like it just seemed like all he had to do was say, I don't like that I failed. It's just for me. I don't even care what happens after that. But there's too much talk about changing the world. I don't know what he's talking about.
Yeah, he makes these weapons, and it makes the story makes a big deal about, because these weapons exist, he believes that the world will change in some significant way. And I suppose if some sort of government got a hold of them, that would happen. But there's never any discussion of who's going to command these weapons, what they're going to do.
Who does he like to
his
control?
His plan is kind of incoherent, and you never know what his true motivation is until the last issue, sort of. He doesn't even get introduced until the third, or at the end of the third issue, there's kind of a cliffhanger splash page where it shows the character, and then the fourth issue is kind of like all about him and Wolverine. And I wish the story was just about them two the whole time. That's my big criticism.
I feel like all of the stuff about there are these mercenaries that are supposed to bring him in alive, and there's a big mystery about who it is that they're trying to bring to it. I feel like this 4-issue miniseries is too short. I feel like what you do with this is you have these 4 issues. If you want a thing called Death of Wolverine be the big payoff to something else that was leading up to it, I want that 4th issue to be all of this. And I just feel like, well, we know that there was some stuff with like the lack of healing factor and all that kind of led up to this. I don't know that there was anything about the mercenaries being after him. That feels like it's set up here. I mean, it may be that there were more people that came after him or something, but I kind of got the sense of he's not really because he kind of generically says to Mr. Fantastic at the beginning of the first issue that it's the word's gonna get out that he doesn't have his healing factor, and then it's gonna be open season. I kind of think that would have been more fun to read, honestly, and that's not what happens. What happens is like the word doesn't get out. In fact, it's the opposite of that, and I want to talk about that because it's weird. What it really is, he says that he's like, people are gonna be after me. Now, maybe that happened in the interim, like there were some other people that found out about him, but clearly these mercenaries didn't know that he didn't have his healing factor. I don't think. I don't even think Sabretooth knew it. And, or at least I don't remember. But so
there was like people on that island that knew, but then when he goes and sees the doctor and cuts his hand and puts it up against the glass, he's all surprised at the fact that he doesn't have his healing factor, which was the guy that started the bounty on his head in the first place, which is kind of strange.
And that's what
like the people that respond to the bounty know he doesn't have his healing factor
they don't somewhat, tell him.
And then the guy that is at the top doesn't. And even Nuke, the guy that we see here that goes to like the bar that Wolverine's at and tries to track him down, he isn't aware of the fact that Wolverine lost his healing factor either. They're just going after him because there's a price on his head.
Yeah, and like I said, that's what's weird about it is that line that he asked Mr. Fantastic it seemed like it was going to be the big setup that got the ball rolling for it's open season. Okay, that could be really cool, you know. Now once again, I don't know that that's what I would want to see for this miniseries. That seems like a cool thing to do to lead up to it, and then maybe you have a story that's less fighting and more exploring the man before he gets killed, right? Like why don't we just? I keep doing it. I don't want to rewrite the thing, but since this is all about Weapon X, it might have been really interesting if Cornelius had, at the beginning of this, gotten him back, tied him down, and then he's, like, torturing him, and then we have, like, a lot of back and forth, you know? And then we just do, like, we do Weapon X kind of again, but it ends in his death this time, and it's still the self-sacrifice thing. But, yeah, the whole reason Cornelius wants him in the first place is just for his healing factor. And when he has that line, so first of all, I didn't understand how none of the mercenaries that were trying to get the bounty said anything to Cornelius about the fact that he didn't have his healing factor. Now, maybe there would be no reason for them to. I don't know that they all even necessarily know that Cornelius is the guy who put the bounty out. Maybe that's a mystery to everybody. That's a thing I wasn't sure about. That might be kind of ambiguous, or maybe if I looked at it again, it's clear and I just missed it. But there's this whole thing where he's like, I just wanted Wolverine for his healing factor, and as soon as he finds out that Wolverine doesn't have his healing factor, he just goes, kill him. Like, that's the only reason is just for the power and nothing else, which I feel like was maybe a missed opportunity to have more interesting stuff between them about the psychology of it. And okay, part of it's X2. I have a really hard time getting past Stryker because Stryker and Wolverine have like this really interesting, like, twisted father-son relationship thing. And it was kind of sad not to see something a little bit more reminiscent of that, because after all, it's not like Wolverine is the only person that's got healing factor. Like, he could go after other healing factor people. That
was my big question in the story, was like, Cornelius is down with working with Viper, and she has Sabretooth chained up as her pet in this. Why not just use Sabretooth?
Yeah, there has to be more of a reason. It's got to be some kind of like nostalgia, or like you know, some kind of like revenge he wants or something. If he talked, like we said earlier, more about, I couldn't control Wolverine specifically. It's stuck in my craw. I'm obsessed with that. I don't like that I couldn't control you. And then and then when it's, oh, you don't have healing factor, I don't care anymore. I resisted that. I think he would, even though Wolverine doesn't have his healing factor, I think he would still, like, strap him down and do something to him. Just because he's Wolverine. I think. I don't know. And once again, I'm not trying to rewrite the thing. I just feel like it didn't seem like in his character with what we were given here. And of course, I read that character in Weapon X, and it just didn't feel right to me.
Yeah, and Wolverine's a character that I haven't read a whole lot of solo stuff with.
Yeah,
but I don't know. I just didn't find the relationship between him and Cornelius to be all that compelling, where it's like, this is the last hurrah for him. I thought it was sort of poetic to see him, completely covered in adamantium, and that's how he dies, and he kind of becomes a statue to his own bane or greatness, I guess. I don't know.
Both at the same
the
time.
Adamantium. Yeah, exactly.
Well, and Wolverine is inherently
a tragic
cool,
but I feel like the setup for that wasn't adequate enough.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. I also didn't like how slow in the uptake Wolverine was about why Cornelius wanted him. Cornelius goes through all this stuff about all this animanium that he's gotten his hands on, and Wolverine, if he's paying attention throughout this, can tell that the guy who's doing all this is looking for adamantium. And then at the moment where it becomes crystal clear, if it wasn't to me already, why he's there, why Wolverine's there. He's like, you want me for my adamantium? Like, he's still saying that. I'm like, come on, dude, catch up. He wants you for your healing factor. But then, at the same time, I'm somewhat sympathetic with Wolverine for seeming a little bit maybe dumb in that situation, because if Wolverine's like me, he's thinking, how does this guy not know that I don't have my healing factor?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I just think all of that stuff didn't really work for me.
Yeah, it's unfortunate.
It is unfortunate. I mean, the cynical comic book fan in me is like, you know, Wolverine's just gonna come back eventually. And they're talking about killing Deadpool soon, too, which is another character that has a healing factor. That's, you know, another character that you know, Cornelius could have potentially used for his plan.
I know. I thought the same thing. Yeah. What I want to see when they do the death of Deadpool, and I know this isn't what they'll do, but it would be great. It would be hilarious. I want Death of Deadpool to just be a panel-for-panel parody of this book. Because I think that would be so funny. But yeah, I mean,
that would be really funny.
When you kill off a character that's that powerful, and I mean, with Wolverine, it works a little bit better because he lost his healing factor. And I liked all the stuff that Mr. Fantastic had, by the way, of like, don't use your claws. There's bacteria, dude. Yeah. Like, I thought all that was really cool. And I'm glad that they put that in here for those of us that weren't reading the stuff from before, because that easily could have been a scene that came before this and wasn't in this, and I kind of appreciated that it was there to kind of catch people up to speed, but it didn't feel too recap-y. And so I really dug that stuff. But I mean, you know, you take somebody like Deadpool, this is not here nor there, but you take somebody like Deadpool, and it's like, unless you take away his ability to heal too, you kill him off, and nobody's going to be surprised when he comes back because he's a character that can't die. So no matter how you kill him off, you can easily finagle a way that he comes back, because he can't die. It's just really easy to do that.
The one thing I'm going to say about this series that I really like is, I kind of like the position that this puts the X-Men continuity in at this point. Because when Marvel Now started, and we had Avengers vs. X-Men, and then Marvel Now started, Charles Xavier was dead, the ideological core of the X-Men disappeared, and Wolverine tried to step up and fill that void. And now that he's gone, it seems like Kitty Pryde is going to be the person that's going to be the leader of the X-Men ideologically and figure out where they're going to go as a mutant society moving forward. And given that Kitty Pryde started as a character that was so rebellious against Professor X and Cyclops and the sort of establishment of the X-Men team, it's very cool that she's kind of now leading that movement into the future. I think that's very cool. I think this leaves the X-Men in a very interesting status quo position. I'm just not necessarily interested in this story specifically as it ended up playing out, because it feels to me like, okay, we have Wolverine in the samurai armor because that's obligatory, and then we have to go towards him fighting in Weapon X because that's obligatory. We have to have him, you know, fight Lady Deathstrike because that's obligatory. It just seemed like hitting all the check marks that people would want to see in a Wolverine story before he goes out, and I don't know. It just felt rather contrived to me.
And it is
that's
contrived.
The best word for it, I think.
I think it could have been flimsier. I've seen this kind of thing done more flimsy. I think that using Cornelius as a launching pad to have an excuse for all these characters to go after Wolverine is not the worst way it could have been done. Like I think I would like that more, once again, if their relationship was more interesting at the end. But I mean, like okay, it's not the most convenient or coincidental thing in the world, but it does feel like, as you said, contrived. I don't get why Cornelius is doing this now. Okay, so it's the fact that he's really super elderly is coinciding with the time when Wolverine loses his healing factor. That's pretty convenient. That is one thing that is really pretty convenient. I kind of feel like it's got to be him because we want to book in Weapon X, and wouldn't it be cool to see Wolverine die where he was born?
Right.
So we got to have that. But it honestly, this reads in some ways less like a real story, and I think Soule does a pretty good job of taking an assignment that is pretty contrived in the first place. I mean, this is less about telling a story and more about getting him to a place we know he's got to get to. What's it called? This is going to happen in the book. It's less about that, and it's more about, as you said, the greatest hits thing. This in some ways, you could take out all the dialogue balloons, and this is just a photo album of stuff that Wolverine did right before he died, right? One thing that I think is really weird, and I think it's in the first issue, I forget, is Wolverine, maybe it's the second issue, I'm looking for it. Oh, yeah, when Wolverine fights Sabretooth, there's this completely random, pointless 2-page spread where he's in the yellow suit, but he's not in the yellow suit. And I don't understand that at all. It's just so we can see it.
The memories of the last times that he's fought Sabretooth. It's supposed to be a throwback to all the other fights that he's had with him.
Okay, can I say why I didn't get that? The reason I didn't get that is because okay, thanks for telling me that. I don't have a problem with it anymore. Except that I don't think it was communicated real well unless I'm just really stupid. Because Viper's like, hey, Sabretooth, go get him. And then you turn the page, and naturally, she says go, so I'm kind of expecting to, see that happening, right? And then so I'm looking at this and I'm going, well, what the hell's he doing in the yellow spandex? And then I flip the page, and they're fighting. Now, I guess what I'm supposed to get from this, and I guess Dan is just smarter than I am, what I'm supposed to get from this, now that you say that, is, if you're right, and I think your interpretation is probably right, you flip... See, actually, now that you say that, I don't know if you're right about it, and I'm going to tell you why in just a second. But anyway, so you flip so hold on. So you flip the page, and what you're supposed to think is, oh, they're starting their fight now. But what it feels like is the fight is still continuing, and maybe Wolverine is just imagining himself in the yellow spandex. The reason that the idea of them being of it being a memory is weird to me, Dan, is because Sabretooth in this 2-page spread is jumping at him with the big collar he was just wearing falling apart.
Well, they do have the memory of Wolverine stabbing Sabretooth in the face like this, and that's how Sabretooth was killed off previously in continuity, so that was the thing that tipped me off to the fact that it was a memory.
No, fair enough, but I'm not sure it's all a memory, because I just don't understand the fact that he's wearing thing. That's weird. And then, those scenes were weird, because then in, the third issue, I think it is, you have the 2-page spread with samurai armor, and there, I expected to turn the page and he wasn't wearing it, because that's what happened with the yellow spandex, but you turn the page and he's wearing it, so I flipped it back, and spent a little bit of time trying to figure out how he had enough time to put it on. Because he's running away from this person, and then suddenly he's wearing it, and I'm like, wow, that was a quick costume change, right? That's neither here nor there, but I just... Some of those scenes felt, again, a little shoehorned in and thrown together just so that we could get all those Wolverine moments.
And it's not to say that they're launching a miniseries after this. It's a weekly miniseries. Charles Soule is writing it called Wolverines, which is like all of the characters in Wolverine's life. Mystique, Lady Deathstrike, Sabretooth, all those people, X-23, sort of reacting to Wolverine's death and trying to sort of fill the void that he left in the Marvel Universe. And the status quo that all those characters are left in could be potentially interesting.
Yeah.
I think especially Sabretooth, with Wolverine being gone, that's a really interesting place to leave that character, because that's kind of like the sole reason he exists, is to take down and be better than Wolverine. So that character without Wolverine being around is potentially really interesting. And I kind of made this same point before with Kitty Pryde. I think this series is better at calling back to and setting up things for the future than it is at being a story in its own right.
Yeah, and you sort of expect that. I think Soule had an impossible task here, right? I mean, it's you know, you have to kill off Wolverine, and everybody has to know that he's going to die in the Thing. And like, wouldn't you suspect that some of the things that are in here were probably mandated, right? I mean,
I would imagine. I mean, obviously, I don't know the inner workings at Marvel, but just me speculating. Mm-hmm. Paul Cornell was the guy that had the original story of Wolverine losing his powers in the first place. Mm-hmm. And then some other writer comes in to write the conclusion of that story where he dies. That seems a little odd to me. I would think that if Paul Cornell had the intent of killing off Wolverine and that wasn't editorially mandated, that he would have wrote it himself, right?
Yeah, I mean that's what you'd think, but I don't know. It's hard to imagine.
I don't know.
It's hard to imagine that the death of a character like this, that's this big, wasn't calculated by the company, because the way I've heard it described by a lot of people, and I can't help but think that this has got to be what it is like I said earlier, the Wolverine's oversaturated, he's in 1,000 books, people are kind of sick of him, let's kill him off and make a big deal out of it, make people really miss him so that we can bring him back later and he'll sell better. I have a really hard time imagining that a writer went to anybody at editorial and said, can I kill off Wolverine? I think it's a lot more likely that Marvel said, let's kill off Wolverine, and they handed it to someone. Who knows? Maybe Paul Cornell knew it 2 years ago. Marvel's been really, really good lately at having that kind of forethought and planning things way, way, way in advance.
Oh yeah, for sure. Their editorial staff has been on point.
It's been really on point
with the direction they've wanted everything they had, for sure.
Yeah. So that's likely, but I don't know why he didn't get to write it. At the same time, I read a couple issues here and there of Paul Cornell's Wolverine and really didn't like it. So I don't know. Now, I mean, there were random issues, but I thought the dialogue was awful of what I read, and I feel like Soule, if the dialogue in this was anything like it was in those, I think Soule probably did a better job than Cornell would have. But that's nothing against Paul Cornell. It's just
I read the first issue initially when Paul Cornell started, when they relaunched everything with Marvel Now, and I thought the first issue was pretty good, but I never really continued with it. It wasn't interesting enough that I would have, read it every month.
Now, I read a lot of comics, obviously, so I could be off base and I'm thinking of a different writer, but I'm almost positive I was reading Paul Cornell's Wolverine. But anyway, let me ask you one last question before we close here, Dan.
Sure.
Do you think in a different world where comics were written more like a regular narrative that wasn't as commercial as comic books, and Wolverine never came back, or didn't come back for a very, very, very long time, that you would like this better?
I think, if you're talking about like how Claremont wanted to do the Dark Wolverine saga and had him killed off in his run, where that was going in his ultimate plan for the X-Men. Yeah, I mean, killing off Wolverine is not a bad idea in concept. I just think how it was executed was something I didn't like. And, removing the fact that it's like commercial and they're trying to kill Wolverine for sales, I'm not as invested in Wolverine as a character where I'm like, oh, I'm going to miss him so much, and I'm like angry that they killed him off for sales reasons. And just looking at this as a story itself, I don't think it was worth all of the hype that it was led up to be. If this was told in long form narrative in the sense that Marvel writers used to do from the 60s to the 80s, where it was just like one continuous story, and you got to this character to a place where, okay, it makes sense to kill him off and there's nothing else to say with this character. He would be superfluous if we kept him around in the book. There would, he would just be a character with nothing to say and nothing to do with thematically. Then yeah, kill him. But here, Jason Aaron got him to a place where I felt like there was much more to say with that character than I thought had been in a long time. And I don't know. Maybe this was the point to kill him where Jason Aaron had left Wolverine and there was, no one else had any sort of direction to go for him. So they were like, yeah, let's kill him off for a while until some writer comes up with some new take where we can say something else with the character that's, interesting and warranted. I guess that's sort of cool. But as it stands with this miniseries by itself, I'm not really digging it.
Well, let me tell you what I mean by that for myself. I think, in a way, I would like just the ending, just like the last issue, a little bit better if it was the last thing we ever saw of Wolverine, because it does feel like kind of a fitting end for him. But you know he's coming back. You know this isn't the last thing we'll see of him. I always really resist that, where here's like the most possible fitting way we could possibly get rid of this character. And then when you bring him back, then what do you do? You know what I mean? If you ever kill him for good, then what do you do? And so, yeah, you look at these kinds of things in two ways. You've got an ongoing continuity, but you've also got this as a piece. And so if you read this and you didn't think about the rest of it and you just thought of this as a story, then I like the way he goes out, but I don't care for a lot of the lead up. But if you look at it in the continuity, this is entirely superfluous. You know he's coming back, and it feels so routine, right? Like, we can't even tout this up. I mean, you know, it sold got a lot of copies, because this kind of thing always does. And I think a lot of people have really liked things about it, but this is going to sound so stupid that I'm complaining about this, and people that hate it when I talk about titles, sorry I'm going to do this, but it's not even called The Death of Wolverine, it's just Death of Wolverine. This is so routine now, we don't even have the article adjective anymore. We don't even have enough gravitas for this thing to be like, The Death of The Death. Think about that. The is definitive. It's the only time it's going to happen. This could have easily been called A Death of Wolverine. I mean, like think about that. Isn't that interesting? You know, it's just it's Death of Wolverine. You know, we do these death of things all the time. This is so informed by every time we've done this before, and I hate that. I almost would have preferred, and I say this with a lot of these kinds of things. I almost would prefer these sorts of things that we act almost like oblivious or in denial about it, where we pretend like it really matters, because this isn't even pretending it matters in a lot of ways, and that's the big thing I resist about it. Yeah, it's more presentation than anything. Sorry. It's
interesting to think about, because one of my favorite deaths that Marvel has done in recent memory, and this, discarding, how they brought him back, and, the in-between stuff that was done, I think Captain America being killed at the end of Civil War was one of the best deaths that Marvel did. It meant a lot. Brubaker did some interesting stuff with that in the Cap book, with Bucky being Captain America for a little while. It wasn't continually as good as I would have liked that book to have been, but early on I thought the Bucky Cap stuff was really cool. And they brought him back eventually, but now that's kind of become a formulaic thing with them, and now you're thinking, like, every character that they kill off, they're eventually going to bring back. They did it with Peter Parker, they did it with Cap, they did it with a bunch of their characters, and, they did it with Johnny Storm, all that kind of thing, and not that those stories were bad. This just doesn't feel like a death that I'm going to be all that invested in moving forward. Wolverine leaving the X-Men at this point, it's potentially interesting, but I'm just not invested in the future of it as much as I was with the death of Cap and the death of Johnny Storm, because I know he's eventually going to come back. When he keeps telling the same story kind of over and over again, with these characters, they're different people, but just killing them off and just examining the aftermath of what it's like when this person's gone, it's kind of the same thing over and over again, depending on what kind of context you're doing it in. And, maybe they'll do something completely different that I've never seen before, but I doubt it at this point. I don't know.
Yeah, the big thing, the place where I have a hard time suspending my disbelief is if every major person dies and comes back, how is anybody worried about anybody that dies? And,
exactly.
and that's the difficult thing. And, you want to suspend your disbelief and just say, well, you just ignore that, and it sucks for those people because their friend just died and they can't be sure if he comes back or anything like that. But the problem is, DC did an entire event about it. It was called Blackest Night. And DC said, we're always killing characters and bringing them back. What if we did an event about that and had everybody that's ever died come back at the same time, and then deal with what a culture where nobody stays dead would be like, and they explored it a little bit. And that wasn't a perfect book, but I feel like once you've done that, I know that's not Marvel, but I feel like once that's been done, you might want to think about sobering up on the whole everybody dies and comes back thing. It's just, and this is just this is an obvious thing to say, but it's just too gimmicky, Dan. I mean, putting these kind of characters in deadly peril. I'm never really afraid anybody's going to die. It's about the moment and about seeing them overcome adversity or not. But I'm never gullible enough to read a book and go, oh man, maybe this character will die in this, because you always know when they're going to die. You're always told that before it actually happens. So the other thing that these books do is it makes me never really afraid for anybody if I'm superficially only supposed to care because, oh, maybe they'll die. It needs to be about the conflict at hand and what that character learns about himself and what we learn about that character. That's what the book should be about.
Yeah, and I mean, it's kind of a tough balancing act, right? Because with these comic book stories, by virtue of what they are, the hero is always going to win or die and come back eventually. You have to choose between one of those two things. They're either going to win or they're going to die and then eventually come back and win retroactively. So, I mean, I suppose it's just a question of how interesting your story is at getting to that point, and this one just wasn't all that interesting to me.
Also, if you're going to do it, as you said earlier, do it, I don't want to talk in circles, but do it organically, as you said, right?
Yeah.
Like if we all know that the character is going to die and come back eventually, try to come up with the most organic way to do it, and don't tout it up as if it's the only time it's ever going to happen. But anyway, that's my final thoughts on it.
Yeah, I mean, the last thing I want to say before we leave is I think it was very fitting to get Steve McNiven to draw this. I think his art is phenomenal.
Thanks for mentioning that. It is really, really good.
Old Man Logan is the last Wolverine story. Mark Millar did that with him, and it's a phenomenal story. I don't know if you've ever read Old Man Logan before.
Still haven't gotten around to it. I need to.
It's really good, and it's sort of the last Wolverine story. He was really old, and the Marvel universe has kind of ended, and him and Hawkeye are going around the United States in like this old car. It's awesome. It's kind of a post-apocalyptic thing where like it's kind of a wish fulfillment thing. Like if Clint Eastwood got to play Wolverine, and he was like, it's really cool. So it's cool to get that guy to draw the last Wolverine story in continuity, I guess, because that story is kind of like the Dark Knight Returns of Wolverine, where it's in continuity, but it's kind of not, I suppose.
Yeah.
So it was cool to get him, and I love all of his art in this. But other than that, I would have to say I like the last issue for some of the things that it kind of brings up, but that's the only thing that I really loved about it. I wasn't all that thrilled with this one, to be honest.
Well, everybody, thanks as always for watching the Comic Vault. We sure appreciate it. If you would ever like to send anything for us to review on the Comic Vault, you can always send that to our P.O. Box, and that is right there on the screen for you. Dan and I will be back again next week to review something else for you, and not going to reveal what that is yet, but we will, because we don't know. But we will pick something for you, and Dan and I are going to review again for you next week. And in the meantime, thanks a bunch for watching. We sure appreciate it. If you've read this book, leave us a comment and let us know what you thought of it. Did you like it more than we did? We'd like to know. Leave a comment. Thanks for watching. I'm Captain Logan.
And I'm Dan.
And happy reading.